Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video we're going to be breaking down 3 of the best Ruby Amethyst lists I think you can be running for Set 5's metagame in Shimmering Skies. If you're a Ruby Amethyst player and you wanted to adapt this deck into the current meta, we're going to talk about some of its matchups, the different lists, and how you can kind of play them to your advantage based on the metagame, and where their strengths and weaknesses lie. So these are proven lists, tournament topping lists, tournament winning lists from some Set 5 tournaments, bigger tournaments that have happened so far. As of today, we have not yet had a DLC happen, but without a doubt, I'm sure Ruby Amethyst will continue its dominance just like it has in previous metagames for Disney's LORCANA. Starting off, I'm actually going to cover what is a most recent list that won from Noim Not or Kendall. He took an SCG Star City Games tournament 1K with this exact list here, and I'm just calling it consistency. This is probably the most standard list with like the brooms and the Chernobog followers, still running the Flynn package and the Sisu, and it's just very consistent. You've got 4's pretty much everything, a couple of tech options like Crab and Sisu, but for the most part, this list is aimed at, from what I can see, just seeing the cards that you need to see when you need to see them, right? You're going to see your 1-drops on the mulligan on the opening play because, you know, you play 8 of them. You mulligan aggressively for one if you don't have one. You're probably going to also see a 2-drop. You develop your 3-drops as you need them. Do you need to play a Fox to rush and gain tempo back? Do you need to play a Crab to gain back tempo? Do you establish Sisu for questing pressure and or high strength? And so on and so forth. And of course, the Goat and the Crab are just advantage generating cards. Maui is a 2-for-1 on a body, basically. Madame Medusa, sort of the same thing. And then Sisu for that kind of diversity, if you can say that, or versatility, I guess, with wiping out some of like the more annoying ward characters. 8 is expensive, but again, because you play 4 up to 3-drop Sisu, you do have an option to shift this for 6, which could wipe out things like Muses and Prince Johns and the Emerald matchups if you're up against those annoying Song decks or discard decks. 4 Brawls, 4 Be Prepared, 4 Friends on the other side, and 4 Queen's Castle. The only Set 5 card in here is the new location, the library. I've covered this to a certain extent with my locations Ruby Amethyst build, which we will take a look at later on in this video, but this card synergizes extremely well with Chernobog's followers and Magic Broom. If you're not playing a location-centric deck, I think just 1 or 2 of these is actually okay, because the Queen's Castle is still technically the stronger card because it does gain you the 2 lore. But this card is very good because, again, it synergizes with the 1-drops, giving you a little bit of extra advantage if you do have this up in the mid to late game and you do draw those 1-drops, which can be underwhelming when you see them in the late game. At least those 1-drops now represent a +2 draw when you're able to play them, move them to the library, and actually get their abilities off, either with the Chernobog to quest to draw 2 when they're at the library, or the Magic Broom where you move into the library, play another character, banish the Broom, draw 1 from Broom, draw 1 from library as well. So very interesting tech options. Of course, another thing that makes this location so good is the fact that it gains you lore. So again, just a very consistent list, 4's for the most part, a couple of tech options. But if you really grind out matches, know your matchups with this deck, you should come out on top. This deck shouldn't really have any bad matchups. It can struggle into the discard because you don't have a lot of additional draw engine. We saw in set 4, for example, these lists tech in the Maleficent 3-drop, which helped to combat some of the Bucky discard, this Maleficent here. And you know, while you do have the 1-drops, which can help you mitigate some of the discard, you do need to see them with the library more or less in order to really trigger enough draw to outplay what is now a more aggressive discard in Amber Emerald discard, right? When we take a look at what Emerald discard might be, this is just like I forget what I called this. I don't know why I called it pros. Like oh no, this is Mufasa. Never mind. We want this one here, Emerald discard. When you look at a list like this, you have to play up against a much more aggressive discard package like the You Have Forgotten Me's and the Lucifers. Not this Bucky once a turn discard every turn, right? You have a much more robust discard package that you're facing up against. So you need a lot of card draw to outdraw the discard here, because you don't have blowout cards except for the Sisu that really just win you the match against a deck like this. And with the Sisu only being a 1-of, it can be a little difficult to do. So keep that in mind. Aside from that, this deck has its strongest matchup, in my opinion, against red-blue. So if you're in a red-blue heavy meta or any kind of Sapphire meta, like Sapphire Steel, which I do think is falling off a little bit, but I think this deck would be very, very strong into that. The Sapphire Emerald deck that's been popping up with the Clarabelle can also give this deck a little bit of trouble. Hopefully you can outpace a deck like that, but the reason why that deck is strong is because if you're playing a slower game where you're able to maintain your hand size with like rabbit bounces, etc., and then they drop that Clarabelle, they're going to generate all that advantage off of the Clarabelle because you have been the player that has been maintaining card advantage, and then they'll just claw it back with the Clarabelle. So just a couple of things to keep in mind when you play a list like this. Again, the benefit here is with the Flynn Rider, you can really run away with the game very early against the slower control decks, but into a deck like Steel Song, Emerald Steel, where they play some of those steel heavy removal options, you might want to be looking at inking the Flynn Riders because they're just an easy target to out with a Let the Storm Rage On, which is a -1 for you because the storm will replace itself, especially if they sing it, and then you lose your Flynn Rider, which is what you try to develop in the early part of the game, right? So you lose a lot of tempo that way. So just a couple of things to consider there. A very effective list overall. Again, doesn't really technically have any really bad matchups, I would say, except for maybe that very aggressive discard deck, which, to be fair, any deck can have a bad matchup against that if that deck gets the right lines of play. But again, if they don't open the busted nuts, you definitely still have a chance because, again, you do have some card draw to mitigate some of the aggressive discard, and then really all it takes is for you to set up some of your blowout cards and, you know, wipe the board once with a Be Prepared, and you should be in a good position. But it's very hard to get to that point, right, against those kind of decks. So the first list, if you're looking for the most consistent option, I would say this one is it. And again, Kendall Noimnot has proven that, but again, he is a master of this ink pairing. Moving on to the next list. So I've modified this one where I was testing out like Chromacon and Elsa a little bit, and this one is focused a little bit more on bounce and draw. So I called this Ruby Amethyst 5.0, and this list focused a little bit less on the whole, well, not even on the library package. We're going for a more control-oriented strategy, so instead of the magic brooms, which are very underwhelming if you don't get the combo off with the library, in my opinion, or, you know, just getting a draw one off of it just seems not that great for a 1-2 body sometimes. But Rafiki coming down really checks aggressive threats like the Daisy Duck. Unfortunately, though, Rafiki does, just like Flynn Rider, get taken out by a Let the Storm Rage On, but this card can be very good. Another thing that's actually somewhat relevant now in the meta is the Emerald decks that are actually pretty good, like Emerald Amethyst, that play the new Bonsai. Like the effect of this Rafiki when it came out was like meaningless, right? Whenever he challenges a hyena character, this character takes no damage from the challenge. Well, Bonsai is actually being played as a 4-of in these Emerald decks, this one here, and it's a 3/2, and it is a hyena. So when your Rafiki is able to challenge into this, or this may stop the Bonsai from questing, it's a real tempo disruptor for the Emerald Amethyst or any Emerald deck that runs Bonsai, even the Emerald Amber deck that's an aggro deck, because it would be a free trade out for your Rafiki, right? And the Bonsai on 2 is such an important card for the Emerald decks to develop. It's a very, very strong card, don't get me wrong. It's a 3/2 body that quests for 2. That is a 2-cost character. It's very, very strong. But overall, the Rafiki being able to check this is also something that, I don't want to say is like super important, but like it does come up. And not only does Rafiki help check the aggro threats, you know, it can trade positively into like the Maleficents and the Lilos for those aggro decks, but it's just a decent character overall. Plus, being a 3/2 when it challenges also helps you deal with opposing locations very effectively as well. So you got this early game package here. Hopefully you see what you need on turn 1, but either of these developing on turn 1 is fine. And then next up, you're going to have in the 2-drop slot, instead of the Flynn Riders, you're going to opt for Cusco's, because again, instead of Magic Brooms, you've got Cusco, which is a little bit more versatile because no matter how this character is banished, you're going to be able to draw a card, unlike the Broom, which means you have to play a character to banish it. So you can continue questing with this, gaining lore, and then when it gets banished, it just replaces itself, which is great. Also works well with Crab, right? Boosting this up to a 4/2 body and trading out with something is very good. And then, of course, you have your Mim Snakes, your Mim Foxes, and then we're back on the set 1 first chapter, Maleficent Sorceress. Again, an additional way for you to mitigate some of that discard off of the aggressive discard decks. Will this be enough with the Rabbits, with the Cuscos, with the Chernobog Followers to mitigate that aggressive discard? I think it gives you a better shot than the version with Flynn Rider, but again, a lot of testing needs to be done to see just how effective it is. What's also interesting, or what I sort of like about this list, is we're using the elephant here, and I think this card is massively underrated right now. It's very, very cheap. It's probably the cheapest it's ever going to be in my opinion, but you know, this card just feels, when you're able to establish this card, it just feels very safe, right? Because it's a huge body that's tough to out, and it does actually have a pretty powerful ability to move damage counters off of itself when it comes up. So if you're playing a list like this, and I don't think I included it in mine, but you may also want to try to fit in Teeth and Ambition somewhere. Like, I'm already on 61, so it's hard for me to try to fit this in. But because you have the Cuscos and you have the Madam Mim elephants, like, Teeth and Ambition synergizes pretty well with this deck. Because if you're able to play this Madam Mim and then sing Teeth with something else, put 2 damage on this Madam Mim, that means on your next turn you can immediately proc the Mim's ability to move those 2 damage counters somewhere else. You've seen Amethyst Steel decks play the Bell Accomplished Mystic to move damage counters. Well, Mim with the Teeth and Ambitions can give you immense value, because Teeth will damage something else for 2 damage already, and then you can move the 2 damage that you put on Elephant to something else as well. So again, just more bounce cards that can help you proc things like Maleficent, again, obviously goats and rabbits. So you just get a little bit of extra synergy by playing the extra 2 bounce cards, of course, with the crabs as well, can be very beneficial. Quest with the Rafiki, if it has nothing to challenge, and then bounce it back, so it's not just sitting there completely vulnerable. So a little bit of extra synergy there, a little bit more combo heavy, you know, and that can be good or bad, because, you know, if you just have a Rafiki but no way to protect it, you might just be like, well, I can't quest with this. Whereas with a Magic Broom, you can at least be like, well, I'll quest with it and then play a character, banish it, and draw a card, so it's not sitting there vulnerable. But again, you don't get the same anti-aggro aspects of Magic Broom over Rafiki too, right? So a little thing to consider there. The goats and the rabbits are going to be staple, and then another card that wasn't in the I'm going to call it like the Flynn list or the consistency list is the Elsa. I do think that this is a very powerful card, and over time I can see this being a staple in Amethyst builds. What's funny is, like, everyone's expecting this card to drop, myself included, and it just hasn't. Like, it's a starter deck foil, right? And the foil version is still going for $9, which is crazy. It's just a testament to just like how much people want this card. And to be fair, like, it is very good, because I think in any Amethyst list that you play, Ruby Amethyst, Amethyst Emerald, Amethyst Sapphire, anything, you can fit this in. And then it also gives you a line of play into the big Elsa from the first chapter, Spirit of Winter, if you did want to play that as well. So yeah, very good card, coming down, tapping something down, and then usually you'll be using something else to take out what you tap down. But this card having the 2 strength means that it immediately also deals with Diablo, if that is still a threat for the Emerald decks as well. Maui's, and you're topping out at Medusa at 3 copies on the 6 cost curve. 4 Brawl still, 4 Be Prepared, and 4 Friends on the other side, and then just the 4 Queen's Castle. So again, just a very straightforward list, pretty consistent as well. You got a couple of interesting tech options. Again, I would like to fit Teeth and Ambitions, maybe a 4th Elsa in here, but the list is very, very tight. You want to make sure you have enough 3 drops, that you have something to play, so you don't want to just be like, well, maybe I can cut these Maleficents. Then you're down to 6 3 drops, which isn't enough. You could opt to cut the elephants, but then if you put the teeth in, it's like you lose some of the synergy that you would get with the elephants. So it's a little weird. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any recommended improvements for a list like this. But moving on to the final list here, I've got the Ruby Amethyst 5.0 locations. So this is the list that I most recently posted some gameplay on. It's very Amethyst heavy, as you can see. And then we focus on the Jim Hawkins at 2. I used to play 3, but I think 2 is more viable. And then 3 libraries and only, and 4 Queen's Castles. So, you know, going 4 and 4 was probably overkill. Like, you do technically need to see the characters in order to really get benefit off of these locations, and really all you need is 1 in rotation. But the way that this deck functions is basically you play a lot of the advantage generating cards, Chernobog Followers, Magic Brooms, Cusco, so it's kind of like a mesh of the first 2 lists, where you're just taking all of the advantage generating cards and putting them together in order to proc them off of the locations, right? Because these cards are very cheap to play, which means you'll have a lot of ink left over to move them to locations, and if you move them to library, all of these cards end up drawing you 2 cards, right? The Chernobog Followers, the Magic Broom, and the Cusco. So very, very strong synergy there. And in my gameplay video, I show that I was drawing like +2. I was getting +2 off of these things so often. I think I drew like 4 off of 2 Chernobyls. I drew 2 off of a Magic Broom, and I may have drawn 2 off of a Cusco. I drew like 8 cards off of 3, right? With the library up, gaining me lore every turn, being a tough location to out with the 8 willpower, right? And everything is inkable, which is always nice as well. Like this deck only has 8 uninkables, so a little bit more friendly, easier to play. Your developed package, you know, as you progress on the curve, is still fairly straightforward. Again, with the snakes, the foxes, and the maleficents, so a lot of card draw, and the crabs, the goats, the rabbits, only 3 elses once again. Again, the 2 Jim Hawkins to be able to generate that free tempo off of the locations. And because you're generating so much advantage, hopefully you don't feel the pinch of, oh, I'm losing that extra card from my hand with the Jim. Like my friend played me and I was using red blue, and he absolutely like wiped the floor with me with a location based deck. A little bit different than, actually it's actually kind of similar to this one, but different than the one that I played in this video because I've edited this deck since. But I remember he was at something like 13 lore and he dropped Jim with a location, and I could out one of the 2 threats but not both. And because I think I had like a Cusco to ink the location that I could have played, or like ice block with a brawl, like 2 ice blocks and a brawl that I could have played. I didn't have enough to play both. And I was like, yeah, like I can out one threat, but then he survives with the other one. So he puts 4 lore on board with Jim Hawkins and Castle, and then I can only deal with 1. And if I don't deal with either, that's 4 lore being generated next turn, plus the Castle getting the extra draw. Like, it's still a very powerful and meta relevant combo. Even if your opponent has the outs to those cards, like the free tempo you generate is still very, very strong, because you're drawing so many cards. Usually that extra card from hand that you lose off the Jim Hawkins should not slow you down or hurt you all that much. Like the tempo is worth the negative air quotes card advantage to develop that free resource. 4 Mauis, and then no Medusas or nothing else on the top end, so a very low to the ground curve option that makes this deck again very, very easy to play. The only uninkables being the crabs and the 4 Be Prepareds. And just like, you know, ever since locations came out in chapter 3 into the Inklands, if you set up locations and then your opponent can't deal with it on the following turn, and then the next turn you're able to be prepared, now your locations are guaranteed, probably going to get you another 2 to 4 to 6 lore depending on what they develop and what you're able to develop in response, right? So the synergy with board wiping and just keeping those locations up, especially with 8 and 7 willpower, is very, very strong. So this is also a very powerful combination, and we know, again, Sapphire decks can have a little bit of trouble with locations. I mean, set 5 came out and gave Sapphire 2 direct counters to locations because that's how bad of a matchup it was against them, and they can still struggle against it as well. So that is going to do it for my Ruby Amethyst list breakdown. Let me know in the comment section below, what is your favorite variation if you've made it this far in the video, or is there a different variation or different cards that you'd opt to play? Thank you again for watching. If you made it this far, Quantum is out.